I'm gonna turn my tiny New York City apartment into a global superpower in 3 easy steps. I'm gonna talk to an expert who knows everything there's to know about superpowers, and I read all of these books to find out exactly what it is that I need to do. Sure, this apartment's tiny, and sure, I gave away my firstborn child as a security deposit, but that doesn't mean I should be humiliated for it. This apartment needs to start getting the respect that it deserves. So I'm gonna do everything that it takes to make it one of the greatest nations in the world. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This is Professor Michael Beckley. He's a famous political scientist who wrote Unrivaled, where he talks about what makes America a superpower and what will allow it to remain so. Thank you so much, Professor Beckley, for joining us. I just want to start from zero. What is a superpower?
Superpower is a country that's head and shoulders above pretty much all others in terms of its wealth and military capabilities, and then a country that also deploys those assets abroad. So you can imagine a country that's extremely wealthy, has a big, powerful military, but if it just keeps all that locked up at home, like your precious, dishes that you only bring out on special occasions, that's not really a superpower. These are countries that are actively flexing their muscles in the world, and they basically structure the international system in which other weaker countries have to operate.
Oh, hell yeah. Now that's what I'm talking about. Conquest, domination, justice. Great men through history have known no limits to their ambition and have advanced human civilization. It was time for me to be amongst them. Yo, how long has that been there? Oh my God. I'll get the respect I deserve when my ambitions come to fruition. So let's find out what the first step is.
Well, I think a lot of it is geography. So the United States has benefited from the fact that it's the only great power in its side of the world, in the Western Hemisphere. All of the other great powers are packed together in Eurasia, and as a result, they compete amongst each other, they fight amongst each other, and they look to the United States for assistance. Meanwhile, the United States has this vast continental space that's packed with resources, and so it's able to amass wealth and power without having to pay the crippling costs of having to really spend much on defending even its own borders. It has the flexibility to pick and choose when it inserts itself. And so you really see the United States rise to superpower status during the course of the world wars, where you have these other great powers smashing each other to bits, and the United States waiting a few years and then coming in, swooping in towards the end of those conflicts, and then decisively shaping the outcome and claiming a share of the spoils. But a lot of that is basically just an outgrowth of its geography.
Let's say you just got to start your own country. You can put it anywhere, start anew. What are the 3 things you would focus on to turn it into a superpower?
So geographically, you want to make sure that has lots of resources, because you don't want to be dependent on potential rivals for your oil or your rare earths or whatever else. So make sure it has a lot of resources. I mentioned transport. If there's a lot of natural transport infrastructure, so this is things like internal waterways, so it makes it really cheap and easy to move goods around, or natural harbors, so that you can engage in trade very easily. And you don't have to spend tons of money, building a Belt and Road across the Himalayas or whatever. I mean, there are still physical constraints on our ability to grow food and grow an economy and extract resources. And so the fewer of those you have, and the more natural transport infrastructure you have, the better. I mean, I put all that under the geographic concern, and then also safety. So the ideal situation is you have bodies of water separating you from other powerful countries, because those bodies of water enable international trade. It's actually a lot cheaper to ship stuff over water, but they prevent armies from coming across. The hardest thing to do in war is amphibious, invasion, D-Day style invasions, moving an army across a body of water where you're totally exposed to enemy fire. So if you have these moats, or if you have a moat around your country, that is awesome from a great power perspective. So I put all that under geography.
Got it. So I'm kind of screwed in my endeavor to make my apartment to superpower, is what it sounds like.
Well, you can make it the command center of your superpower, so you can be giving orders from there and talking to subordinates. But I think you're going to have to get out in the world, to really turn yourself into that superpower that you've always wanted to be.
Would you be willing to be like part of my administration, maybe?
I'll have to see your views and background. We just met, so maybe second time around I'll feel more comfortable. But you seem like a good guy, so I'm at least interested in joining you.
Okay, I appreciate that. That may sound like a no, and that's because it is. You could have been the Cheney to my Bush, Professor Beckley. So it seems the first thing I need is great geography, and my apartment might not cut it. I have no natural resources, no oceans protecting me on either side. Luckily for me, there's an island right next to New York City with all of those things. Water on both sides, people, close to powerful trading partners, natural resources. Roosevelt Island. And now it was time for me to liberate the people of this island to build a new nation. 4:07 minutes ago, we have established Roosevelt Island as an independent nation with the proclamation to become the greatest superpower this world has ever seen. We will fight for liberty, for freedom, and for power. Okay, so my plan to claim better geography for my new country didn't go as smoothly as I wanted it to, but I remember something else Professor Beckley said that day.
The second category are the institutions.
Challenge accepted. It's time for me to establish some institutions, but first, what does that even mean? This is a town divided by a border. Despite sharing most of the same culture and history for decades, I mean, this is what that border looked like in 1899. Now, on one side of that border, people earn 3 times as much. They're far more likely to get an education. They're far healthier. On the other side of the town, not so much. This is Nogales, Arizona, and this is Nogales, Mexico. And which side of the border you're born on will change your life. It's a case study on why some nations get rich and some stay poor. And before we talk more about that, look at this map. You could easily mistake this map as showing warmer countries versus colder countries, but it's actually showing each country's GDP per capita. And what we see is that warmer countries just tend to be poorer. Sure, there's some glaring exceptions like Singapore or Australia, which is a fake country we made up to scare children, but this trend is just hard to ignore. And sure, it's kind of obvious to point out that the US and Europe are wealthier than India or Africa, but the trend continues when you narrow down. Denmark is colder and wealthier than England, and England is colder and wealthier than Spain. New England is colder and wealthier than the South. Northern Italy is colder and wealthier than Southern Italy. There's something going on here. How is this possible? Let's start by looking at the Netherlands. If God created the earth, then the Dutch created the Netherlands, is a little humble saying they have up there. In the Middle Ages, Europe was ruled by centralized authoritarian monarchs that ruled vast amounts of land, but that wasn't the case in the Netherlands. I mean, you could hardly call that land. It was just a bunch of swamp and water and a little bit of grass in the middle. And the Dutch basically had to create hills to carve out their own land. Because people literally had to create their own land to be able to farm from it, the Dutch had a revolutionary idea that land didn't belong to a king or a god, but to themselves. They invented the idea of private control over land. During the 1300s Netherlands, it was impossible to find a centralized ruler. Everybody was a farmer, but the land wasn't that great. Nobody was really getting rich off that. So they had to trade with each other. And what they realized pretty quickly is that if you have better things to sell to someone else, they're gonna give you more money for it. So they started inventing things. They invented a windmill-powered water pump. It was revolutionary in terms of agricultural technology. In fact, a lot of innovation started coming out of this swampy area. And because no one person has significantly more economic leverage than another, they decided that they should use collective decision-making to make their political systems. You take this system and fast forward to the 1590s to the 1740s, and this swampy area became an undisputed global superpower. They're dominating the shipping game. They have the strongest navy in the world. They trade with every corner of the globe. They created the world's first stock exchange, and their currency was so popular it was used in every part of the world. By the 1650s, the Dutch undisputedly had a higher standard of living compared to anywhere else in Europe or the world. To this day, the Netherlands consistently ranks amongst the wealthiest and most developed countries in the world. So how did this country with no natural gifts become a superpower? To understand this better, let's look at Venezuela. Venezuela has a ton of natural resources. They have tons of land. It's very fertile. You can grow a lot of great things on it. They have a ton of oil. When a country has a lot of natural resources, what we find is that people are able to build a lot more easily by just tilling that land. In fact, you're incentivized to go and conquer your neighboring lands, turn your neighbors into forced labor so you can extract from that land at a cheaper cost. And this is called extractive institutions. And the mother of all extractive institutions is colonialism. After Christopher Columbus found South America and thought he got to India, which was a close one for me, then the Spanish colonialists established extremely extractive institutions, turning indigenous populations into forced labor on their own land. And these systems perpetuate to this day because of this thing called institutional inertia. Basically, if you have a ton of economic power, you can solidify that through political power, which protects your economic power using the law and the military, and this just perpetuates through generations. To this day, even though Venezuela is run by a self-proclaimed socialist who wants to redistribute wealth, it's described by political scientists as an oligarchy because the leader does very little to intervene with the power that drug cartels and oil billionaires have. Stories of countries that are well endowed with natural resources turning into poorer countries today is so common that it's called the resource paradox. It's almost impossible for these countries to set up inclusive institutions rather than extractive ones. In the book Why Nations Fail, the economists describe that developing inclusive institutions is the fundamental difference that defines if a country will become rich or stay poor. It's understanding this that explains why warmer countries just tend to be poorer and why the same town governed by two different institutions can have such different outcomes. So now it's obvious exactly what I need to do to make my apartment into a global superpower. So the constitution of 50-50 land is gonna have equal rights, liberties, democracy. We're gonna have a presidential system. I'm gonna be the president.
Wait, who made you president?
Yes, my only citizen is Billy the racist bear, who you may remember as a correspondent from previous videos. You probably don't. No one watched those videos. I'm a grown man talking to a teddy bear, by the way. Why gonna be president? Because I founded the country.
I didn't vote for you.
No, look, we'll have a fair and free election in a few years and you can run.
I want to be president.
Look, there's gonna be a free and fair election in a few years. You can run.
Billy, I hate you. You shouldn't be president. I should be president.
Billy, stop.
You
Billy,
suck.
Billy.
You suck.
Billy.
Suck it.
Oh.
Suck it. Suck it. Suck it.
Stop. Okay, so there is one more thing that superpowers have, and I think this can work out for me. So America has this little thing where every single time a crisis happens, we can just spend our way out of it. During COVID, the United States distributed $5 trillion worth of stimulus, while the major European nations collectively distributed around $1 trillion. And economists find that because of this, the US was the fastest country to recover and was able to avoid a recession, while Europe is plagued by slow growth. And before you tell me about post-COVID inflation, it was definitely a problem, but it was way worse in Europe. So how does the US pull off this magic trick? It's thanks to the US dollar being the global reserve currency. Basically, institutions and banks around the world want to save their money in a currency that they know is going to be safe. So when it comes to trust in the global financial markets, institutions around the world trust the American dollar and nothing else even comes close. To this day, 60% of global reserves are in American dollars. In fact, the US dollar is used in 90% of global transactions. And this gives the US two huge advantages. Let me give you an example. In 2014, a French bank was fined $8.9 billion for processing payments that were coming through countries that the US had put sanctions on, like Cuba or Sudan or Iran. But the weird thing is that these were payments that happened between non-Americans and they were processed by a non-American bank. So how did the US government fine this French bank? Because the transactions happened in US dollars, and anything that happens in US dollars have to follow US law. This gives the US immense influence in enforcing its laws in every corner of the world. So when a country falls out of favor from the US, they can have their economy decimated by sanctions that every country has to follow whether they like it or not. And when this happened, the French were pissed. Speaking of the French, they hosted the 2024 Olympics, and did you know that the standard gold medal costs a few $100s, but the Paralympic gold medals cost an arm and a leg? I miss my mom. The second huge advantage is spending. The US and Europe used to have rival economies, but that changed in 2008. Since then, Europe has kind of flatlined, but the US has kept growing. And by the end of 2023, the US economy was almost double the size of the European economy, 27 trillion versus 15 trillion. I actually once pointed out on social media that if the UK, France, or Germany joined the United States as the 51st state, it would become the poorest state in the Union, poorer than even Mississippi in terms of GDP per capita. All the comments had really only nice things to say to me about that. This divergence between the US and Europe started in 2008 because of the global financial crisis, which the US was able to spend itself out of. In 2007, the United States increased its debt to GDP ratio from 60% to about 80%, while Europe increased it from 60% to 70%. And the US ran into no problems. In fact, they've increased their debt by a lot more since then. But European countries fell into critical debt crises. Greece, Portugal, and Spain all faced major debt crises. By 2010, Greek debt was considered junk bonds. Since then, the IMF and the EU have forced European countries into austerity measures, which basically limits their public spending. So basically, having a global reserve currency allows the United States to enforce its laws in every corner of the world while being able to spend itself out of any crisis. But it is time for the reign of the US dollars to come to an end. So I started my own currency, and I'm gonna go out there and buy up as many US dollars as I can until this becomes the new global reserve currency. We're trying to start our own currency. Do you guys wanna buy some of our cash off us. We're trying to get in the system.
That's so sweet, but I'm gonna have to pass.
It's
Yeah.
Monopoly money. Can I see it?
Yeah.
Is this you?
No, that's a different Indian guy. We look very similar. No, I'm kidding. It is me. You guys want to buy cash off us?
I don't think so.
You guys want it for free anyway?
That's okay.
$100.
We're all good.
Shoot. This clearly wasn't working, so I came up with a new plan. We'll give you the money to buy it off us. Just pretend I didn't give that to you.
Okay.
Oh, hey, do you want some blue bucks?
Yeah, of course. And I have $1 for that.
Oh my God. Well, let's do 100 for one.
All right.
Wow. Perfect. You want 100 for one? Let's go.
Oh, whoa. I would love to buy that.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much, guys.
I think it's an investment.
Oh, you're too kind. Oh my God, that's perfect. This is not right. All right, thank you. Thank you. Oh, hey. So I didn't turn my New York City apartment into a global superpower, which is fine. But in writing this video, something occurred to me. I thought that the answer to what makes a great superpower would be great leaders and wars and great innovators. But in reality, it was things that were far more predetermined. Things like geography. America became a great nation in part because while the rest of the world's nations were decimating each other in World War II, America was protected by two great oceans. America developed inclusive institutions because when Europeans were looking for lucrative crops, they didn't find many here like they did in South America or Africa or India. And that's really lucky. And then those factors together created the fastest growing country of the 20th century that gave us the global reserve currency, further perpetuating our dominance. And look, I believe in American exceptionalism. I, like many, was born into the privilege of being an American, but my parents chose it, and I'll always be hyper aware of the fact that it was the greatest decision they ever made. America is a great country because it has great people, great ideas and ideals, but also great circumstances. And that makes me think American exceptionalism can never become American ego, because maybe we have a responsibility to share a little bit with the great people with great ideas that were born into a place where the crops were just a bit too good and the weather was just a bit too warm. Food for thought.